Back in 1997, a man walked into his garage to test a machine he believed could bend the laws of time. Minutes later, the building erupted into flames. When investigators arrived, they found melted metal, scorched concrete, and signs of an experiment gone horribly wrong. But they never found the man. For nearly 3 decades, Mike Markham was considered dead. Then, against all logic, he came back. Most people know this as a time travel story, but according to the evidence, that may be the least frightening explanation. Mike Markham grew up in rural Missouri with an obsession that would eventually consume his life. He wasn't a scientist working inside a university laboratory. He had no grants, no team, and no formal credentials. What he did have was an endless fascination with electricity. As a teenager, he spent hours scavenging parts from junkyards, collecting transformers, motors, and discarded electronics. While other people his age were planning careers, Mike was teaching himself electrical engineering through library books and trial and error. Over time, his experiments became increasingly ambitious. Then, sometime in the early 1990s, something happened that changed everything. Inside his garage, Mike had built a Jacob's ladder. It is a simple device that creates a climbing electrical arc between 2 metal rods. It has been used in science demonstrations for decades. One night, Mike positioned a laser beam through the arc while testing different voltages. At first, nothing unusual happened. Then he noticed something strange. A small metal washer sitting nearby appeared to flicker. Not move, not roll, disappear. For the briefest fraction of a second, it was simply gone. Then it returned. Mike assumed his eyes were playing tricks on him, so he repeated the experiment. The same thing happened, then again, and again. Small metal objects seemed to vanish inside a strange electromagnetic field before reappearing moments later. Most people would have dismissed the phenomenon and moved on. Mike did the opposite. He became obsessed. The more he experimented, the more convinced he became that he had discovered something nobody understood, and he desperately wanted someone to believe him. In January 1995, Mike called Coast to Coast AM, one of the most popular late-night radio shows in America. Hosted by Art Bell, the program specialized in strange phenomena, unexplained mysteries, and extraordinary claims. Even among Bell's endless stream of unusual callers, Mike stood out. He described a device capable of making objects vanish temporarily. Art Bell was skeptical. Naturally, anyone would be. But Mike wasn't describing science fiction. He spoke like a man genuinely trying to understand something that frightened him. He claimed the atmosphere inside the garage felt wrong whenever the effect appeared. The air became heavy. The environment felt distorted. Even animals reacted strangely. According to Mike, his dog refused to enter the garage. Birds avoided the roof. Something about the field seemed to disturb living creatures. Art Bell urged him to document everything, bring in witnesses, record evidence, verify the claims. It was good advice. Mike ignored it, because by that point, he believed he was on the edge of a discovery that could change history. And discoveries like that can be intoxicating. Over the following months, his experiments became increasingly dangerous. The brief disappearances grew longer, seconds instead of fractions of a second. Objects would vanish completely before returning. Sometimes they returned colder than before. Sometimes they appeared altered, at least according to Mike's reports. The more power he fed into the system, the stronger the effects became. But there was a problem. His equipment wasn't powerful enough. So Mike made a decision that would later become infamous. He stole industrial transformers from a nearby electrical substation. Not one, several. He wired them into his experimental setup and activated the system. The resulting power draw was enormous. Lights flickered across neighboring properties. Utility companies quickly traced the disturbance back to Mike's garage. He was arrested and spent time in jail. For most people, that would have ended the story. For Mike, it became motivation. He filled notebooks with sketches, theories, and redesigns. By the time he was released, he wasn't discouraged. He was more determined than ever, and that determination would push him toward a point of no return. When Mike returned to Coast AM months later, listeners noticed something had changed. His voice sounded different, faster, more intense, more desperate. The experiments were escalating. According to Mike, objects were not simply flickering anymore. They were disappearing completely. One test involved a wooden block. The block vanished for several seconds before returning. When Mike picked it up, he claimed it felt freezing cold, far colder than the surrounding environment. Another experiment allegedly involved a flower. When it returned, it appeared aged and wilted, as though much more time had passed for the flower than for the rest of the room. Then came the most disturbing claim. Mike reportedly tested the device on a mouse. The animal disappeared. When it returned, something seemed wrong. It behaved erratically, disoriented, confused. The mouse later died. Whether these events actually occurred remains impossible to verify. But what matters is how Mike interpreted them. He believed he was no longer observing a simple electrical anomaly. He believed he was interacting with reality itself. And that belief made him dangerous. Because once someone becomes convinced they've discovered a doorway into the unknown, caution often becomes the first casualty. By early 1997, Mike claimed he had achieved something extraordinary. The field had grown large enough for partial human exposure. He described stepping into it, only briefly, yet the effects disturbed him. Time felt different. Movements appeared slower. The world seemed disconnected. He later told Art Bell that reality itself felt altered while standing inside the field. Then he made a statement that changed the entire story. He said he was preparing for a full test on himself. Art Bell immediately warned him against it, but Mike had already made up his mind. He believed he was standing at the edge of a breakthrough. One final experiment, one final adjustment, one final step. Then he vanished. In March 1997, all communication stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. Friends couldn't reach him. The property appeared abandoned. Soon afterward, the garage burned down. Investigators found evidence of electrical damage everywhere. Melted components, destroyed transformers, scorched concrete. But there was no body, no remains, no explanation. Mike Markham had disappeared. And for decades, nobody knew what happened. The mystery spread across the early internet. Forums exploded with theories. Some believed he had accidentally killed himself. Others claimed government agencies intervened. A few insisted he had successfully built a time machine. The story became legend. And like all legends, it grew stranger with time. Sightings emerged. Rumors circulated. People claimed to encounter a man matching Mike's description in unexpected places. Then, those stories faded. Nothing concrete ever appeared. Years passed, then decades. Eventually, most people forgot, until 2022. That was when the story took a turn nobody expected. A couple renovating an old farmhouse reportedly discovered a wooden box hidden inside a wall. Inside were journals, circuit diagrams, technical notes, photographs, and documents allegedly connected to Mike Markham. Some of the material appeared far newer than it should have been. The journals contained dates extending years beyond his disappearance. If authentic, they raised an impossible question. Who had written them? And where had they come from? Soon after the discovery became public, another shocking claim emerged. Mike Markham was alive. Not only alive, present. According to reports, he contacted the people who found the box and eventually met with them in person. After nearly 3 decades, the missing man had returned. But what he allegedly told them transformed the story completely. Because according to Mike, he had never traveled through time, not in the way people imagined. Instead, he claimed the machine had done something else, something far stranger. He described becoming desynchronized from reality, still present, still alive, but somehow disconnected from normal perception. People could see him, then forget him, meet him, then struggle to remember details afterward, like a radio signal drifting slightly off frequency, never completely gone, yet never fully present. According to Mike, every exposure to the machine made the condition worse. He became harder to notice, harder to remember, harder to hold inside other people's minds. At first, it sounded absurd. Then he explained the consequences. Jobs became impossible to keep. Acquaintances forgot conversations. People struggled to recall meeting him. Records became difficult to maintain. His existence seemed to slide through the cracks of ordinary attention. Not invisible, not dead, something in between. Imagine entering a room and realizing nobody remembers you were there an hour later. Imagine introducing yourself repeatedly to the same people. Imagine watching your own identity slowly dissolve from the memories of everyone around you. That was the fate Mike claimed he had created for himself. And whether the story is true or not, the idea is terrifying, because it touches something deeper than death. Most people fear dying, but beneath that fear lies another one, the fear of being forgotten. History is filled with vanished civilizations, lost languages, abandoned cities, and erased names. Entire cultures disappeared because nobody remained to remember them. If memory is what preserves existence, what happens when memory itself begins to fail? What happens when a person becomes impossible to hold on to? That question is what gives the Mike Markham story its power. Not the machine, not the electricity, not the possibility of time travel. The possibility that reality depends on observation more than we realize. That who we are exists partly inside the minds of other people. And if those connections break, what remains? Today, occasional reports still surface. A man with unusual technical knowledge, a stranger introducing himself as Mike Markham, witnesses who remember the encounter but struggle to remember details. None of it has been verified. None of it can be proven. But the stories persist. Small echoes drifting through the edges of the internet. And perhaps that's fitting. Because if Mike Markham's final explanation was true, then he didn't become a time traveler. He became something far stranger. A man trapped between existence and absence, present enough to leave traces, gone enough to be forgotten. And somewhere tonight, if the stories are true, he may still be walking through a world that can barely remember he exists. The real mystery was never whether Mike Markham traveled through time. The real mystery is whether being remembered is what makes any of us real in the first place. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more history mysteries.